While filming for Blade Trinity, Jessica Biel was instructed to shoot an arrow directly at the camera that was more than 60 feet away. It was protected by plexiglass except for a tiny 2x2-inch square in front of the lens, which Biel managed to hit with a direct bullseye, thus destroying the $300,000 camera. An electric company in Arkansas was forced to post this PSA after someone took out a power line with an unbelievable arrow shot. In 1982, the Manuela family lost their beloved pet tortoise Manuela while their house was being renovated. 30 years later, they were cleaning out their attic after their father died and miraculously found Manuela still alive. They think she was able to survive by eating termites in the furniture that their father was hoarding. In 2020, a fisherman off the coast of Maine caught a lobster that was exactly half blue and half brown, split perfectly down the center of its body. Scientists confirmed it was a bilateral gynandromorph, meaning it was literally half male and half female. The odds of finding one in the wild are about 1 in 50 million. A pair of Dutch short track skaters finished a race so closely together that it was impossible to pick a winner. They both finished with a time of 43.128 seconds, so they ended up sharing the gold. Jim Springer and Jim Lewis are identical twins who were separated at birth but ended up living nearly identical lives. Both married a woman named Linda, got divorced, and remarried a woman named Betty. They also both had a dog named Toy, drove a Chevy, and smoked Salem cigarettes. All of this was discovered when they were reunited at the age of 39. 1 in a Million, Part 1. In 1984, Michael Jackson's hair caught fire during the filming of a Pepsi commercial, a moment that marked the beginning of his long struggle with pain and prescription drugs. Eerily, that day, January 27, 1984, was the exact midpoint of his life. 9,282 days after he was born and 9,282 days before he died. In 2013, a vet clinic in Ohio discovered a turtle with the word God naturally spelled out across its shell. In 1989, a Soviet jet fighter pilot mistakenly ejected just after takeoff from Poland. The aircraft continued flying for more than 500 miles on autopilot and ended up all the way in Belgium, only to crash into a house, killing an unlucky teenager. In 2012, a British man bought 5 amateur paintings for a mere $5 at a Las Vegas garage sale. When he decided to reframe one of them, he found a piece of paper behind it that turned out to contain an original sketch by Andy Warhol. His signature was also etched into the back, giving it a value of at least $2 million. On November 26, 2012, something happened for the first and only time in the history of New York City. For the entire day, there was not one single report of a violent crime. In 1957, a woman attending a Phillies game was hit with a foul ball that broke her nose. The game was briefly paused, then resumed once the woman was put on a stretcher. As they carried her away, the very next pitch was fouled off and hit the same woman, breaking a bone in her knee. Venus the cat became internet famous for having a face split perfectly down the middle. One side black with a green eye, the other side orange with a blue eye. She's a natural-born chimera, meaning her body contains the DNA of 2 separate embryos fused into one. In 2015, Massachusetts man Richard Knoll needed to break a $100 bill. So he went to a local convenience store and bought a couple of scratch-off tickets for the first time in his life just to get the change. It turned out to be one of the best off-the-cuff decisions of his life, since one of the tickets was the $10 million jackpot winner. In 2013, ABC News reporter Amy Roback had a mammogram taken live on TV to promote breast cancer awareness. It just so happened that she actually did have cancer, and the procedure likely saved her life. In 2013, a 39-year-old Brazilian woman named Adriana wanted to find her mother who abandoned her when she was a baby. So she went on a TV show and ended up finding her mom through the power of the internet. The two had an emotional reunion, but her mother revealed that she had also abandoned Adriana's infant brother, Leandro. In a shocking twist, Adriana's husband, whom she had a daughter with, turned out to be her biological brother, Leandro. But despite the pair being siblings, they vowed to never separate. 1 in a Million, Part 3. In 1923, a 2-year-old Scotch Collie English Shepherd mix named Bobby was on a cross-country road trip with his family from Oregon. But while stopping in Wolcott, Indiana, Bobby was chased off by a pack of stray dogs and suddenly disappeared. The family searched everywhere and posted flyers, but eventually had to return home, heartbroken and assuming they'd lost him forever. But 6 months later, in February of 1924, Bobby miraculously appeared on their doorstep in Oregon, muddy, mangy, and with worn-out paws, but very much alive. Over time, witnesses along the way came forward. Bobby had been spotted crossing the Rocky Mountains, swimming across rivers, begging for food at farms, and walking across the snow in multiple states. By retracing those sightings, it was estimated that he had traveled over 2,500 miles alone, somehow navigating back to the home he hadn't seen in months. The story captivated America as he became famous nationwide, and thousands attended his funeral when he passed away in 1927. Scientists said the odds of it happening were 1 in 74 trillion. While 34-year-old Ann Hodges was napping on her couch in Alabama in 1954, a softball-sized meteorite tore through her roof, bounced off a radiator, and slammed into her side, leaving a massive bruise but miraculously sparing her life. She had become the only confirmed person in history to be struck by a meteorite. The space rock triggered a legal battle between Anne and her landlord over ownership, but it ended up in Anne's possession. The rock is now on display at the Alabama Museum of Natural History. Tom Cruise divorced all 3 of his ex-wives when they turned 33, and each is 11 years younger than the last. In 2009, a retired policeman named Geraint Wolford was admitted to Abergele Hospital in North Wales. Amazingly, it just so happened that he was put next to another retired policeman named Geraint Wolford. The men weren't related, had never met, and were the only 2 people in Europe named Geraint Wolford. In 2004, Grandma Dorothy Fletcher suddenly suffered a heart attack on her flight to Florida. When the stewardess asked if there was a doctor on board, 15 people quickly stood up. It was a group of heart doctors on their way to a cardiology conference. In June of 2020, YouTuber David Dobrik operated an excavator in a shallow Utah lake, swinging his friend Jeff Wittick by a rope attached to the machine. When Jeff's turn came, Dobrik spun him violently before stopping abruptly, apparently attempting to prank him, causing Jeff to slam into the heavy machinery and into the water. He briefly lost consciousness and was pulled from the lake in critical condition. The impact fractured his skull in 9 places, shattered his eye socket, broke his hip and foot, tore his leg ligaments, and nearly blinded him. Jeff spent months recovering, enduring at least 9 surgeries, and publicly revealed that David never checked in a single time after the accident. 2 years later, he sued Dobrik for $10 million, citing lifelong injuries, mounting medical expenses, and lost income. The dumbass stunt was originally intended for a vlog that never released. Dobrik later claimed that it was the worst thing that's ever happened to me, while insisting that it was Jeff's idea. Morbid Facts, Part 313. Tammy Lynn Leppert was a rising actress and beauty queen who vanished under mysterious circumstances in 1983 at just 18 years old. Known for her brief appearance in Scarface, Tammy began acting strangely after a party while filming Spring Break, reportedly growing paranoid and convinced that someone was trying to kill her. She abruptly quit the Scarface set during a violent scene and was briefly hospitalized for observation, but doctors found no drugs or alcohol in her system. On July 6, 1983, she was dropped off near Cocoa Beach in Florida, barefoot and visibly distressed, and was never seen again. Despite theories ranging from mental health struggles to potential links to serial killers, her case remains unsolved. Founded in 1825 by free Black Americans, Seneca Village was a thriving community in what is now Central Park. By the 1850s, it had grown into a multi-ethnic, working-class neighborhood with over 250 residents. But in 1857, New York City seized the land through eminent domain to build Central Park, forcibly evicting the residents. Though compensation was offered, it was reportedly minuscule, and most families were pushed into poverty or disappeared from public records. For decades, Seneca Village was completely erased from history, only recently receiving recognition, as archaeologists have uncovered remnants of the lost community. This is the tragic story of the man who tried to live with grizzly bears. New York man Timothy Treadwell always said he hated modern civilization and felt like he belonged in nature living with bears. So he spent 13 summers living among Alaskan grizzly bears, documenting their behavior and advocating for their protection. But in 2003, Timothy and his girlfriend Amy, who was terrified of bears, were camping at a grizzly site much later in the year than normal, at a time when bears try to gain as much fat as possible before hibernation, making them much more aggressive than usual. Some of the last footage recorded by Treadwell hours before his death showed one particular bear that he said he didn't feel very comfortable around. This was believed to be the bear that would end up murdering Timothy, as his mangled spine, right arm, and head with a fixed grimace on his face were soon found near the camp. His girlfriend's partial remains were also found nearby, and the gruesome audio was captured by his camera. but authorities have refused to release the recordings to this day. On the day before 9/11, George Carlin recorded a live set in Las Vegas titled "I Kinda Like It When a Lot of People Die," intended as the closing segment of his next special on HBO. But after the attacks the very next morning, the title suddenly felt incredibly disrespectful for obvious reasons. Carlin wisely shelved the material and renamed the special Complaints and Grievances. A few years later, he planned to revive the original title for a new special, only to scrap it once again following the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. In 1959, popular New York DJ Peter Tripp locked himself in a glass booth in Times Square and attempted to stay awake for more than 200 hours as part of a publicity stunt. But as the days passed, Tripp's mind began to unravel. He started hallucinating vividly, screaming that doctors were imposters, believing that people were trying to poison him, and insisting that the furniture was on fire. By the end of it, he had entered a full-on psychotic state. Though he eventually recovered enough to return to broadcasting, those close to him said he was never the same psychologically. His stunt became one of the earliest public examples of sleep deprivation's terrifying morbid facts, part 314. In July of 2014, 53-year-old teacher Sharon Budd was in the passenger seat on Interstate 80 in Pennsylvania when a rock thrown from an overpass crashed through the windshield and struck her in the face, blinding her in one eye, shattering her skull, and nearly killing her. The rock had been thrown by a group of teenage boys who were engaged in a reckless spree, stealing steaks, smashing windows with bats, tearing through cornfields, and gathering heavy stones specifically to hurl at passing vehicles. After the impact, they laughed, cheered, and even returned to the scene twice more before being caught. All of them were eventually convicted, and several received prison time. The trauma completely upended Sharon's family, and 2 years later, her husband Randy, who had tirelessly fought for stricter overpass protections and campaigned for legislative change, tragically took his own life, apparently overwhelmed by the financial and emotional toll of the horrible incident. This woman was caught on camera doing something deeply disturbing to win a chess match. Earlier this year, Russian pro chess player Amina Abakarova apparently needed a way to knock her opponent out of a tournament. So she decided to go to the extreme and poison the woman, 30-year-old Ume Osmanova, in what's being treated as an assassination attempt. Amina poured mercury from a thermometer onto the victim's chessboard before her next match and smeared it all over her side of the board with one of the pieces. Osmanova said she began feeling unwell during her match 30 minutes later, complaining of sudden severe nausea and dizziness, prompting an immediate call for medical assistance. After the security footage was reviewed by authorities, Amina had no choice but to confess to the murder attempt. Osmanova ended up making a full recovery, as the attacker was banned from future chess competitions and stripped of her previous titles. Abakarova now potentially faces several years in Russian prison for the senseless attack. Christina Formella, a 30-year-old special ed teacher and soccer coach at a high school in Illinois, is facing 55 felony charges tied to alleged misconduct with a student that reportedly began when he was just 14 years old. Authorities claim the inappropriate relationship lasted nearly 2 years and involved over 50 encounters, many occurring on school grounds during class hours and some at the teacher's own home while her husband was away. The case began after the student's mother found concerning messages on the boy's phone, prompting Formella's arrest in March of 2025. Investigators later uncovered writings where Formella accused the student of cheating on her and even mentioned plans to take her husband's money and disappear. But despite these allegations, her husband has continued to stand by her, even accompanying her to court appearances while holding her hand. Formella has pleaded not guilty to her charges and is out on bond under strict conditions. If convicted, she faces up to 60 years in prison. Morbid Facts, Part 315. In 2006, Abraham Shakespeare won $30 million in the Florida lottery and tried to use it to help others, giving away large sums to friends, family, and even strangers. But sadly, his generosity made him a target. A woman named Doris Dee Moore pretended to help manage his finances, slowly taking control of his assets while isolating him from loved ones. In 2009, Abraham suddenly vanished without a trace. Months later, his body was found buried beneath a concrete slab behind Dee Dee's property, shot twice in the chest and covered with lime. In 2012, Moore was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Florence Lawrence, often called the first movie star, rose to fame in the early 1900s and became one of the first film actors to be publicly credited by name. At the height of her career, she suffered a devastating injury in 1915 when a staged fire spiraled out of control, leaving her with severe burns and a fractured spine. Universal Studios refused to pay her medical bills, and her career never recovered. Over the years, she faded into obscurity, taking uncredited roles and struggling with chronic pain and depression. When she died in 1938, she was buried in an unmarked grave, as Hollywood had all but forgotten the woman who helped define it. Morbid Facts, Part 300. In 1995, 3 men from Houston built a complex, fully functioning jetpack. But shortly after its first test flight, one of the guys was brutally murdered on his front porch. The second guy was kidnapped and just barely escaped with his life. And the third guy spent 8 years in prison for kidnapping the second guy. The murder case is still unsolved, and the jetpack has remained missing for decades. This terrifying clip shows South African boxer Simiso Buthelezi throwing punches at thin air. The fight was stopped, and Simiso was immediately put into a medically induced coma at the hospital. But he later died from what doctors say was a severe brain bleed. The most divorced person of monogamous marriages was Baptist minister Glenn Wolfe. He had married 31 separate times, mostly to teenagers, because he claimed he spoke their language. When Wolfe passed away from heart failure in 1997, his body went unclaimed, and none of the 28 women he married attended the funeral. In 2020, Tim Bleefnick appeared on Family Feud and joked that the biggest mistake he made at his wedding was saying "I do."
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding? Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. Not my mistake. I love my wife.
But 3 years later, in February of 2023, his estranged wife Rebecca Bleefnick was found shot 14 times in their home while their 3 young boys were upstairs. The couple had apparently been going through a bitter divorce, and Tim went to the extreme to deal with it. He was arrested, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When 36-year-old Heather McManamy was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she began writing dozens of greeting cards for her young daughter to open in the years after she was gone, covering birthdays, graduations, heartbreaks, and even her wedding day. Each card was filled with love, jokes, and advice, allowing her daughter to still receive words of comfort and celebration long after Heather's death in 2015. It was her way of staying present for every milestone she knew she wouldn't live to see. Morbid Facts, Part 654. In the months leading up to his death, actor and comedian Chris Farley was visibly deteriorating, sweating profusely, coughing up blood, and often unable to walk without assistance. His appearances on SNL and late-night shows became increasingly erratic as producers began to fear he might die right on set. On December 18, 1997, he was found face down in his Chicago apartment wearing only a shirt after several days of binging on alcohol and hard drugs. The last person to see him alive was a sex worker he had hired named Heidi Hauser. As she was leaving, Farley reportedly followed her down the hall while begging her, "Don't leave me, please don't leave me," which were likely his final words. The cause of death was a speedball overdose, a lethal mix of cocaine and morphine. Eerily, Farley idolized John Belushi and always said he wanted to be just like him, even saying in sketches, "I'll probably go out like Belushi." Both comedians died of speedball overdoses at the young age of 33. Morbid Facts, Part 432. In March of 1998, 23-year-old Virginia woman Amy Lynn Bradley was on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship to Curacao when she suddenly vanished from the balcony of her cabin around 6 a.m. The Coast Guard conducted a 4-day search in surrounding waters but found no trace of her, so authorities concluded that she simply fell overboard and drowned. But in the years since, there have been several reported sightings of Amy that suggest she may have been kidnapped and forced into human trafficking. 1 year after she went missing, a U.S. Navy sailor claimed he met a woman named Amy in a Barbados brothel who matched her description and begged him for help, but he didn't report it at the time. In 2005, an anonymous email was sent to Amy's family, containing 2 photographs of a sex worker who closely resembled Amy, but nothing ever came of it. Despite various other sightings of the woman with men holding on to her, Amy Lynn Bradley was declared legally dead in March of 2010, 12 years after her disappearance. Before he was a convicted felon, NFL star quarterback Michael Vick was secretly running a brutal dogfighting ring on his own property in Virginia. For years, he and his associates bred pit bulls for violent high-stakes fights, and when the dogs underperformed, they were tortured and killed in some of the most sadistic ways imaginable. Vick admitted to personally helping drown, beat, hang, shoot, and even electrocute dogs to death. One of the most disturbing methods involved clipping jumper cables to a dog's body and lowering it into a shallow pool of water until the animal died in agony. When the operation was finally exposed, Vic served 23 months in prison, losing his career, endorsements, and nearly $100 million. Over 70 dogs were rescued from the compound, many scarred for life and too damaged to recover, though some were rehabilitated and adopted into loving homes. Despite Vic's eventual return to the NFL and carefully staged public apologies, the cruelty he oversaw left a permanent stain on his legacy. Morbid Facts, Part 657. In August of 2004, 21-year-old Josh Hutcherson and his longtime friend, 23-year-old Frankie Brome, spent the night drinking at a bar in Georgia. On the drive home, Brome leaned his head outside the passenger side window, apparently to get some fresh air. At the same time, Hutcherson, heavily intoxicated with a blood alcohol level around .22, veered off the road and struck a support wire for a telephone pole, decapitating Brome instantly. Apparently unaware of what had happened, Hutcherson drove more than 10 miles home, parked the truck with Brome's headless body still inside, and went to bed. The next morning, a neighbor discovered the body still inside the vehicle, and Brome's head was later recovered from the crash site. Hutcherson was charged with vehicular homicide and pleaded guilty in 2005, receiving a 5-year sentence. In a surprising twist, Brome's family, who had known Hutcherson for years, publicly asked the court for some leniency, stating they didn't want Hutcherson imprisoned.